Tonight on the Fifth Chapter, as America closes in on the return of sports, why is Dr. Fauci bursting the bubble by suggesting another bubble? Dennis and Brian have the details. Major League Baseball and its players union close in on a deal. Can they cross the finish line, and will it be a good product? And with coronavirus cases on the rise in Florida, is the NBA's Orlando bubble in trouble, and will players refuse to show up? Join the conversation by commenting live on YouTube and Facebook Live. This is the Fifth Chapter with Dennis Fithian and Brian Chapman.
He represents the mitten by way of Penn State. When Chapman gets to talking sports, the people can't wait. He represents the mitten. Be a true EMU, but cut Dennis in the fall and his veins bleeding blue. They got respect around the state. When that light turns red, so don't sleep on these dudes. Just invite your friends to cut your nap short and tip your cap for and sit back for the Fifth Chapter. Brian Chapman, Dennis Fithian. When they open their mouths, they spit in the facts, bro. This ain't even optional, man. You just have to tune into YouTube to watch the broadcast, or download it to your phone to peep the podcast. They mix laughter, they get after. It's all captured in the Fifth Chapter.
That's right, and welcome to episode number 12 of the Fifth Chapter. I am Brian Chapman. He is Dennis Fithian. In your first Thursday back from Florida. Welcome back once again.
It's good to be here, ready to rock and roll.
And we're ready for your story time in the Fifth Chapter, which, didn't you say that was going to be about going to the Civil War Memorial?
That didn't happen. I was going to go to Chattanooga, but for whatever reason, we ended up in northern Georgia instead of southern Tennessee, so it didn't happen.
Okay, so I've got no clue what Dennis's story time is going to be. As far as today's show is concerned, I want to first of all thank you guys for tuning in for 5 fantastic chapters here on episode 12. Everybody who's watching on YouTube, on Facebook Live, and also, of course, those listening via the podcast on Apple, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and you can participate in each show by sending in your comments on the feedback live on either Facebook Live or on YouTube. Let's take a look, though, at today's book. And as you can see, in the second chapter, MLB and the MLB Players Association looks like they're about 10 games away from finally getting a deal done. Will we have one perhaps by our next show Tuesday? In the third chapter, you got coronavirus cases spiking in Florida, and that's perhaps putting the NBA's bubble in trouble. In the fourth chapter, the Pistons hire Troy Weaver to be their new general manager, and we'll let you know what we think about that hire. And then in the fifth chapter, as we just mentioned, it's story time. Also, I want to mention this, just before the third chapter, I will be unveiling the big secret, the big surprise. It's going to be a big benefit to the fifth chapter, and it's going to be a big benefit to you guys out there as well. So make sure that you're watching between the second chapter and the third chapter. Highly beneficial to Dennis and I, and to you, the loyal viewer of the fifth chapter. But Dennis, let's start off with the first chapter, and that takes us to the NFL. This is not some place we thought we would be on the 18th of June. But you got Dr. Anthony Fauci speaking to CNN's Sanjay Gupta, their chief medical correspondent, earlier today. And he spoke about the NFL and the pandemic and what's going to happen with the NFL coming back. And as you can see in this video that we'll put up for you, it was not all roses and champagne. Here's what Sanjay Gupta of CNN said about what Dr. Fauci said to him.
And I talked to Dr. Fauci, asked specifically about football, because obviously a later season. I show you a little bit of what he said. He obviously has concerns, but bringing up this idea that in order for this to work properly, in order for a team to be able to do this, players would essentially have to be inside a bubble, not really having significant interaction from the community. They need to be tested nearly every day, and it would be hard to see how football, he said, would be able to be played, given that there's likely going to be a second wave and a predictable flu season. If you start to add in all these various things, you can see the last line there, football may not happen this year. So unfortunately, the season starts, the training camps start end of July. The season starts in September. This is the exact time, I think, as many people know, where two things could be happening at the same time. You could get an uptick. I won't call it a second wave because that would imply that a first wave has come and gone. We're not there yet by any means, but you could still see an uptick in the September and the fall months. And then, flu season, which begins end of September, early October, on top of that, could really worsen things as well. So legitimate concerns that Dr. Fauci is raising there.
Well, Dennis, that sucks. But what do you think about what Dr. Anthony Fauci is saying about the NFL, A, needing a bubble, and B, might not even happen this year?
Well, we haven't heard from Dr. Fauci in a while. He was quiet. Now, just the last couple of days, he's resurfaced and he's had a lot to say here. The first thing is I'm really surprised, and I know taking like the comments on Twitter or Facebook, you try to take that with a grain of salt. But when I look at comments, whether it's under a CNN video or whether it's under some sports story, it's like 90% plus of people that are basically like, this guy's a fraud. I'm tired of Fauci. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a flip-flopper. We're going to play football. Get this guy off my TV screen. I mean, it is across the board. And look, man, this guy is the leading medical expert in the United States, and people are dismissing him. And they're going, it's like are you going to listen to the leading medical expert in the United States, or are you going to listen to a guy at 7-Eleven at the Slurpee machine? Most people are doing the latter right now, or they think they know more. Look, there's nobody that likes football more than me or wants to see football more than me. And a lot of people were pointing to, well, the NFL's medical doctor, he's dismissing Fauci. We're playing football. They're going to do everything they can. And are you going to believe the guy that is coming down for money? And this is how it has evolved since over 3 months ago, since we had a shutdown, and then it was the economy. It was always like, hey, what are we doing with money? And what are we doing to keep people safe? People have made up their mind that, hey, it's the money is going to rule. We are not listening to Dr. Fauci. That's at least the impression that I get. And I thought today was a very sobering story from Fauci because thinking about it, one, I think what this underscores, there's not going to be any fans. That's for sure.
Yeah.
In the NFL or college football. You can talk about, well, maybe they'll have 1,000, maybe they'll have 5,000, maybe there'll be nobody. But there's also a chance that there's not going to be football, which has been that was a chance all along. People just didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear it myself. And since we hadn't heard from Fauci in a while, it sort of seemed like we're heading to getting back and football was going to be inevitable, and today it didn't feel like that.
No, it was, I think, just like you said, sobering, but I think it was also a reality check because when you think about how a lot of the public has had their attention taken off of the coronavirus pandemic because of the George Floyd protests and some other things, a lot of people think that we're in the clear. And then we'll talk about this later in the show. In the state of Michigan, it looks like we're pretty close to being in the clear until a second wave, if there is one. But just before the show started, I was watching a little bit of Anderson Cooper, and one of the things he mentioned was that we haven't had these daily coronavirus task force briefings in a month or two. And back in April, when we were having these on a regular basis, everyone was more concerned, and they heard from Fauci, they heard from Birx, they heard from the president and the vice president on a regular basis, so it was top of mind. And all the states were either closed or being criticized for not being closed. Now that all 50 states are reopened in some form or fashion, and we're not hearing on a regular basis from the experts about the coronavirus, while it's spreading in other parts of the country, not in New York, not in Michigan, but certainly along the South, there's a lot of people out there saying, hey, you know what? We're in the clear. What's this dude Fauci doing coming out and saying, hey, things are not so good? He just wants to pop up every once in a while to give me some negative news. I mean, I'm with you. Like when people talk all the time about, I don't want to hear from Fauci, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and you compare him to the 7-Eleven guy or the person who puts out a meme, think about Fauci's resume and compare it to the 7-Eleven guy's resume or the meme creator's resume or my resume or your resume. Anthony Fauci, he's about as old as dirt. And since about 5 years after dirt was created, he's been studying this. He's got an undergraduate degree, probably a graduate degree because he's a doctor. He's been studying this as well for decades, these diseases. And every single day, he meets with other coronavirus task force doctors to discuss the developments. And what do we do? What does the public do? We listen to like a little smidget of what he says. So he's forgotten about 50,000 times more than we ever know. So I kind of tend to trust him when he says things like this. And I don't like it, but he's the expert, not me and you.
Yeah, a lot of people we're so conditioned, whether it's politics or sports, have your take and stick to it and stick to your guns. I see that's like the biggest charge against Fauci. People are like, man, this guy's flip-flopping all the time. It's like, well, if you're getting news as a scientist, now you could change your opinion. Okay, like, maybe masks aren't. And this is how science works. Like, people don't like that in sports. If you're like, I like Michigan. Well, maybe I like Michigan State. You're a fraud. And
what about 500 years ago? I thought you said the world was flat. Now you're saying it's round. You're a fraud.
In politics, it's like that. It's like, oh, this guy's a flip-flopper, and everything else. And in science, you will flip-flop. You are going to change as the information comes in. You don't just stick with your original statement if you have new information. And with the coronavirus, there's new information all the time. It's a novel COVID-19. So you're getting new information all the time. And it's the one thing, like, I know, like, we're all, like, experts. We're experts in the medical field, and we flipped over. Now we're, civil rights experts. One day baseball experts and everything else. That's the way it goes. Everybody has a lot of hot takes, but it's a little bit surprising. Like, and I know politics has a lot to do with it. There's become this thing, mask, no mask, a pushback against Fauci and everything else. Mm-hmm. We want our sports. People, they're like, nobody likes sitting home or in small businesses and our life being, changed big time. People are like, I know they have fatigue over this. And it's a little bit surprising.
Just
because you're
tired of the bad news doesn't mean that all of a sudden people aren't dying in Texas and Arizona and Florida and places like that. In terms of what he was talking about, we're not going to have football. We may not have football this year, and they need a bubble. I think that's important to address as well, because I think we are going to have football. I just don't know how much of it we're going to have. I don't know if we're going to finish the season, especially if there's a second wave. We know that these owners really want to play. We know that money is not going to be an issue like it is in baseball, because in baseball, they've got 81 regular season home dates for owners to make money. In the NFL, they make more money with only 8 regular season games and 2 preseason games. They make their money from TV. So if nobody shows up to games, that's not a big deal at all. But if all of a sudden we've got a situation where the second wave is looking bad or worse than the first wave, and you got 2,000-3,000 people dying a day in October and November, they're going to have to stop the season, postpone it, or cancel the rest of the season. And then when you look at the other football, college football, that's even less likely to conclude, because if there's an outbreak or if there's a campus where they don't have students going to class, then they're not going to have football, period. They're not going to have football games. They can't just have a waiver for football players to show up and have all the rest of the students not show up to campus.
Yeah, I saw today Ward Manuel, the Michigan AD. He was doing a Zoom, and I was reading some of the comments from him. He said that they were going to have news about whether there would be an attempt at a football season by the end of this month, certainly in early July. But he emphasized, I think twice in there, that there was not going to be any waivers that any players were going to sign, and there wasn't going to be a bubble. So that was from Ward Manuel. I thought it was interesting yesterday. I was watching a Lions media session with Darrell Bevell, the offensive coordinator for the Lions.
You don't like him, do you?
Well, I think he's a little bit reckless as a play caller, and just thinking that, Matt Stafford's, going to be all great guns and everything's going to be fantastic with the offense with 8 games under Bevel. I get the excitement, but I've seen the other offensive coordinators have similar type of, the plaudits, and it ended up getting them pink slips. But all of that aside, I thought it was interesting. A couple things. One of the guys asked him about, hey, could you see taking one of your quarterbacks, let's say, Matt Stafford and Chase Daniel, game day, end up testing positive for coronavirus. Are you going to take a third-string quarterback and quarantine him so you'd possibly have, a quarantine quarterback that you might need to call up that's not going to be around any other players as an emergency? It's like, the old break glass in case of emergency. You're going to really keep one of those QBs in a bubble. So maybe, now we were talking about offensive linemen, and you have some depth there. You don't have much depth at the quarterback position. I thought that was pretty interesting when you're just thinking about maybe having an emergency quarterback, and you really would have him in a bubble.
If they go to a break glass third string quarterback, it's going to be like what the Lions had last year in their final 6 games when they had, it wasn't David Blau, it was Jeff Driscoll, and they lost every single game. So whether they quarantine the third string quarterback or not, any team that has to go to a third-string quarterback that isn't already one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the NFL is just going to lose. You don't win games with a third-string quarterback unless you've got an exceptional group of players around him. And by the way, jumping back quickly to college football, there was college football news today. 13 University of Texas college football players tested positive for coronavirus today. And considering the average team has about 100 players, that's 13% of the team. Texas is one of those states where the coronavirus is rising. So that's certainly not a good sign for college football. And then in terms of a bubble, Fauci said he doesn't know exactly how that would be able to work. I don't know how that would work either, because there's questions about the NBA bubble, which we'll get to. And with the NBA, you got 13 to 15 players. You add on coaches and trainers. You got about 30 or 40 individuals or representatives for each team. In the NHL, maybe you got 40 to 45, and not every single team is going to be in the bubble. In the NFL, you got a 53-man roster. You add coaches, trainers, staff. You might be at 100 players times all 32 teams, 3,200 people. Plus, where are you going to find enough football fields in one bubble to have all those games and practices taking place at once? You can't have a football bubble.
You can't have a football bubble. And then Fauci was telling baseball that they'd have to wrap up everything by the end of September. I think he said September 26th. Well, what's that mean for football? Yeah. Everything's just getting going there in both college and pro. So that was a pretty daunting statement as well, when it was like, wait a second, there's going to be a second wave, or you need to get out of there by September 26th. That's not happening. And then he said that, the NFL players are going to need to be tested every single day. And I don't even think the NBA is doing that. So I don't know, like all of that stuff, it's just like there's no way you could have all the teams in one location. I know they're on private jets, but when they're home, are they going to are you really talking about these players staying in a hotel and staying away from their families or girlfriends or friends for 5 or 6 months? I mean, the NBA players are going to have to do it for a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure they're going to be able to do it. Now you're talking about the NFL guys possibly doing it for 5 or 6 months. That's just unrealistic. And then wrapping everything up by the end of September. That's what he said for baseball. What's that mean for football? And then, testing every day. There's a lot of it where you're just like, wow, man.
Well, I hope that the guy at the 7-Eleven is right and that Anthony Fauci is dead wrong about a second wave. I will say that.
Let's go for the guy from 7-Eleven, man. He's like, we're playing football. Dr. Fauci's a fraud.
Yeah, exactly.
He doesn't even know how to spell science.
Yeah, and probably doesn't know how to spell Fauci either.
Well, one thing that Major League Baseball doesn't know how to spell is deal. That we've come to a deal as we flip the page and get to Chapter 2. Well, yesterday at this time, well, actually it was a Tuesday on the last Fifth Chapter, we were sitting over here a little bit giddy that, okay, finally, they got a framework for a deal, 60 games, expanded playoffs. Baseball's coming back. They played hardball, yelling back and forth at each other, but a framework for a deal as Rob Manfred went out to Arizona, did what a lot of people were talking about, get face-to-face in a room with Tony Clark, the players' rep, and hammer out a deal. Don't leave there until you have a deal. And, Manfred got on his private jet, flew back to New York, and he thought he had a framework for a deal. So much so that he, put one out on baseball letterhead, said, yeah, we got the framework for the deal, leaked it out to those baseball insiders, and we were all set and let's go. Even though they They screwed themselves by not, getting out there by the 4th of July. Something was better than nothing. But then Tony Clark, who said that the players were done negotiating, and they just said, when and where we'll be there. Well, they told them when and where, but now they're coming back, and they sent him another proposal for a 70-gamer, which just a few minutes ago I saw Manfred said 70 is impossible. So where are we at here, Chap, on the back and forth with baseball? It seems like we're headed to the bottom of the ninth here.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing, because the bottom of the ninth would mean the end of the game or end of the negotiations. And just a few more details to share with you guys. They have agreed to full prorated pay, whether it's 60 or 70 games. But in this new MLBPA package, like you mentioned, 70 games. Spring training begins June 26th, which is next Friday. Expanded playoffs, 16 teams.
Playoffs.
Yes. 16 in the playoff in 2020 and 2021.
Sounds like hockey.
Hockey and basketball each have 16 teams. Also, opt-outs, full service and salary for players who are high risk and those who live with high-risk individuals. And there are two other things I want to mention. Oh, here we go. Universal DH in 2020 and 2021. And, they want permission to put advertisements or patches on the uniforms, which, does anybody ever like that? But
no.
yeah, especially because the fans don't get any of that money. And if you go buy a jersey at the team shop, it doesn't get any cheaper. But I think this is all pretty good news for the most part. We're getting closer to a deal. We're not at a point where they're saying we're not talking. Now it just seems like they're trying to decide between 60 and 70 games. And I think that in the next few days, they'll meet somewhere in the middle. It'll be in the mid-60s. I'm glad that Rob Manfred and Tony Clark got the owners to cave on a fully prorated salary. We all knew that was going to happen. I'm glad that there don't seem to be any Manfred ball tricks, like, hey, let's stick a man on second base in the 7th inning or in the 9th inning or the 10th inning, or let's have a pitch clock, or let's experiment with robot umpires. I hate Manfred ball, so I'm glad that's not in there. I would like to see more games, not less. Am I going to complain if it's 60 games as opposed to 70 games? Probably not. I really hate seeing 16 teams make the playoffs. One thing I really like about baseball is that you don't have average teams or below average teams getting into the playoffs that have no business being there. You're always a good team or a great team, and oftentimes you can be a good team and not get in. But if it's just for 2 years, just so that there can be more playoff games so the owners can get more money, I'm okay with it, as long as they revert back to 10 teams in 2022. I don't like the DH. I like having the separate rules, but if we're going to have AL teams playing NL teams as their division rivals, like the Cubs and the White Sox being the Tigers' rival, then I'm okay with it for this year. Overall, though, I'm encouraged because it looks like we're getting closer to baseball. I'd raise my probability from 85% to 98% that we'll have baseball this year.
Yeah, I'll sit at 90%. Man, you're a real traditionalist with all those things. Yeah, they play 162 games. You don't need 16 teams next year in a playoff. I could get it, in a 65-gamer this year at a one time, which is a little bit tricked up, contrary to what you're saying, letting in over half of the teams in a postseason. But, you get it in such a short season. But you would think with 60 being agreed with a framework and then the players come back with 70, it doesn't take a genius or even a guy at 7-Eleven. It's like, let's go, 65 games. It sounds pretty simple.
We've hate 7-Eleven employees.
No, I don't. I love 7-Eleven. Slurpees, man, I'm a big fan of them. I haven't had one in a couple of years, but I want one right now. Let's get to some of the feedback, whether you're watching on YouTube, like I see Sideshow Raj is there saying, hey, what's up? He's saying happy sports, man. Chris is just saying, great job, gentlemen. Watching on Facebook Live here. Michael saying, what's up? Everybody's just giving us the what's up. No, Tim, he's like saying, I hope we have football, especially college. Jaworski saying baseball is so stupid. DJ saying, I'm trying to figure out how we're going to get baseball with COVID cases skyrocketing in both Florida and Arizona. I'll leave that one to you. You're somebody that looks at the graphs, the numbers on a day-to-day basis. You have John Hopkins' page favorited on your computer and everything else. You put those daily coronavirus tweets, which I appreciate. I mean, I'm not saying it's tough work. I've looked at some of those graphs and everything, but go ahead and explain that. As DJ says, how are we going to get baseball going with everything going on in Florida and Arizona?
Well, I'll say this. It's a good thing that they have decided not to go with one of their original plans that they put forth in March and April, and that was we'll have a grapefruit league bubble and we'll have a cactus league bubble where we'll have half the teams in Arizona, half the teams in Florida, so that we can stay where the coronavirus isn't spreading, because Arizona and Florida right now are where it's peaking. So I think that is a positive. Look, I don't want to get too political, but the governors of those states are not about putting on masks. They're not about shutting things down. The governor of Florida just yesterday said we're not going to shut things down again. So, if you're just concerned about seeing baseball in those places where coronavirus is spiking, then you're going to see it. If you're concerned about their health, then just hope that, I guess, just ignore everybody that might be getting sick in all those states. But I don't think that the governors are going to let rising coronavirus cases in those states get in the way of sports. I mean, think about Florida, which DJ mentioned specifically. Florida was a state that said, hey, WWE, come here to open up. UFC, come here for your first few events after the coronavirus pandemic. So those states seem like they're going to be okay.
They're operating like Oklahoma is getting ready to bring Trump in for a big rally. He was going to do it this week, but he's moved it back a week. And then the Republican convention is going to be in Jacksonville coming up in a couple months. So they're ready to party in Florida. That's for sure. All right, hey, Dan Hasty on Facebook Live. Normally he'd be out calling baseball games, but I watch him sitting out on his porch or in his driveway around the fire doing Facebook Lives, talking baseball. Mm-hmm. It's good to see him on here. Tim saying, you guys think the Tigers have a chance, like back in '87, short season when we won the division?
No. Go ahead, and then I'll refute all of it.
I think that they could be in the playoff chase. If 16 teams are making the playoffs, and it's a 60-game season, even if it's a 65-game season, I think the Tigers could stay in the playoffs till the midway point, to the halfway point of the season. So, yeah, I think they can finish up 500. If you're you know what? I found this week I was looking it up, what the standings were after 50 games. You know how many games the Nationals were under 500, 50 games?
They were 19-31.
Yeah, very
12
good.
games below 500. So,
but I looked at it; they were 10, but maybe they did fall to ultimately 12 games. But yeah, there were a ton of games below 500. And remember, 2 years ago, the Tigers were almost 500 all the way to June 17th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me ask you this: where is the Max Scherzer of the 2020 Tigers? Where is the Steven Strasburg of the 2020 Tigers?
Maybe
Where's
Michael
the Anthony
Fulmer.
Rendon? Where are all those all-star players?
Fulmer and Boyd, at the top of the rotation there.
Oh, that's right. Fulmer, who hasn't pitched in a year and a half, and Boyd, who was only good for half of a year last year.
I'm not saying they're going to win it. I'm saying that I think that through 30 games, they can play 500 balls. Okay. So technically that's going to have them in the playoff hunt if there's 16 teams.
And I'm telling you, that's not going to be the case. You don't go from 47 and 114, the second worst franchise currently in all of sports, only ahead of the pathetic Detroit Red Wings, to even contending for a playoff spot. They're more likely to lose 8 of their first 10 games, 9 of their first 10 games, than to be 500 or a game or two below 500 as we roll into September. It's not going to happen. What have they done this offseason? They added Jonathan Scope, and they added C.J. Cron, they added Ivan Nova, and they're bringing Michael Fulmer back. That doesn't get you from the worst team in baseball, the second worst franchise in all of sports, to competing for a playoff spot.
Well,
if it was 25 teams, okay, but 16? BS.
You left out 2 of the big 4 besides, Cron there. The Cameron Maybin's coming back, and Romine.
Oops.
Part of their
my
big
bad.
4.
Forgot about those legends.
Hey, I think that through 30 games, that they could be 500. They can win. They can win 15 games.
Yeah, in your little fifth chapter cup, I think you've got some Tigers Old English D Kool-Aid today.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Maybe I need something in there.
Yeah. Either that, or you've got yourself some alcohol in there, and since we're not regulated by the FCC, you can have as much vodka or whatever that you want in there.
It's water.
Okay, I take your word for it. Now, Dennis, before we turn the page to the third chapter, it is time for the big surprise that you guys have been waiting multiple weeks for. And here it is. We know that the fifth chapter is a brand new show. We're only into episode 12, and we are growing. But we want you to participate in our show. We want you to spread the word about our show, and we want to compensate some of you for doing so. And here's how. As a lot of you guys know, before each show, on Twitter and on Facebook, Dennis posts a video of himself, sometimes with his goats in the background, that share a couple of the topics that we're going to discuss during the show, so that we can solicit feedback, so that you can be ready to think about what we're discussing. You can leave a tweet, you can leave a comment on Facebook, and so that if you want to, you can record a video of yourself about 30 seconds or less, and then we can play that during the show. And we want to encourage you guys to do that while helping us out and spreading the word about our show. There are two ways to do that. First is on Twitter. When Dennis puts out his video, he'll do that before 7 p.m. on each Tuesday and Thursday. You can respond with a video of your own, and if you do so, 30 seconds or less about whatever the topics are, and we play your video during the show, and you retweet his tweet to share the message about our show with your friends, then you'll have a chance to win a gift card. Additionally, on Facebook, when he sends out the video to preview the show, it's the same thing. Just respond with a video of your own and share it. But when you share it, make sure that you change the settings from private or just to your friends to public. We want everyone to know that you're watching the fifth chapter, and we want your friends to tune in too. So if you respond to Dennis's message on Facebook with a video message of your own, so that we can have more content for our show, and we play your video during the show, and you share that message publicly, then you'll have a chance to win a gift card. We'll let you know what those gift cards are. Dennis will tell you what those gift cards are in his video. Once again, he'll put out his video by about 7 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You create the video, you retweet it if it's on Twitter, you share it publicly if it's on Facebook, and you'll have a chance to win. At the end of the week, Dennis and I will select the best video response, and we'll send that person a gift card.
To 7-Eleven to get a Slurpee?
I've already picked up the gift cards, and I do not have any 7-Eleven gift cards yet. But maybe you could like trade it for a 7-Eleven gift card with a friend of yours.
Free 30-minute ride in an Uber? That's what Anthony. That's a pretty good guess.
Well, there are Uber gift cards out there, but you'll have to find out on Tuesday what the first gift card is. Now we are ready to turn the page to the third chapter. We have been talking a little bit about how things are going in Florida, and that's where the NBA and its bubble are going to be. We've still got Kyrie Irving and his obnoxious ass talking about getting players to not play so they can protest. There is also a report that came out just after our show ended on Tuesday that Kyrie Irving wanted the players to form their own league. I mean, you guys get now why I'm sick of Kyrie Irving doing anything but talking about basketball. He can talk, but I mean, he provides nothing of substance. He's the VP of the Players Union. He needs to be impeached. That said, it looks like some players might indeed choose not to show up when the NBA resumes and has its bubble. They have until the 24th, which is Wednesday, to let their teams know what they plan to do. And earlier today on The Jump on ESPN, Brian Windhorst and Kendrick Perkins sounded off on what they thought these players might do.
I think we're going to see a number, but I don't know if it's going to be because of the political situation. I think we're going to start seeing players test positive relatively soon here because the testing is already going on for some teams. And just like we're seeing in college athletes, just like we're seeing MLS players with NFL players, guys are going to test positive. And the rates of infection are rising in Orlando. So there's a number of reasons why you could get skittish about not wanting to commit to this. Being in solidarity with Kyrie, Avery Bradley, and others is only one of those reasons.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brian. I think, if players opt out, it's not going to be because of what's going on in America for civil rights, but it's going to be because of the coronavirus. Guys are going to test positive before going to Orlando. Guys are going to be afraid of getting the coronavirus. I think that is a concern. But for us, in my opinion, from what I know, guys want to play. I talk to a lot of guys around the league. I talk to a lot of coaches around the league, and guys are excited about starting up the season. Guys are ready to get back to work. I just read an article that the Toronto Raptors are going out there days early than everyone else. So guys are excited about playing basketball, but I do think a percentage of guys may stay home, but it's not due to what's going on for us with the civil rights movement or whatever the case may be. It's going to be due to the coronavirus situation.
Well, look, Dwight
So
said
there you
in
go.
the
That's
most...
coming straight from the Jump on ESPN. Players potentially deciding to sit out. Additionally, the NBA doesn't want old people perhaps going into the bubble. Obviously, we know, Dennis, that they are more susceptible to getting, or not to get into the coronavirus, but they're more likely to have some adverse reactions. And there are a number of old coaches out there like Greg Popovich, who's 71 years old.
Mark
And,
D'Antonio?
He said, what's that?
Mark D'Antonio for the Rockets?
Yep, Mark D'Antonio, Alvin Gentry. And
Mike D'Antoni, sorry.
That's right. Hey, we don't have to worry about mixing up his name with the Spartans head coach anymore.
No.
But as you can see in this article I just put up for you guys on the screen, Coach Popovich was worried that the league's new coronavirus restrictions, quote, could be restricted from leading their teams and could face considerable challenges in resuming their careers. And also, the NBA Coaches Association put out this statement: the health and safety of all NBA coaches is our main concern. However, we are also concerned with a coach's opportunity to work and to not have their ability to secure future jobs be severely jeopardized. The league assured us that a coach will not be excluded because of age. So, Dennis, you've got these coaches that are concerned about returning, the coaches that are concerned about age discrimination. You got players perhaps not wanting to return, and you got Kendrick Perkins and Brian Windhurst saying, yeah, they expect those things to happen. As you remove that offensive mug from the screen, and as we wait until June 24th, which is next Wednesday, for players to inform teams about whether or not they're going to show up, what do you think about all these concerns in the Orlando bubble where coronavirus cases around that bubble are exploding?
Well, I'll take Perk at his word. He said he's been talking to players and coaches, and if they've been telling him that they're thinking about opting out, so I hear that. I don't think it'll be teams from the Bucks and Lakers, unless it's Dwight Howard for the Lakers, or the Clippers. I think those are the three teams. Everybody knows those are the teams that are the prohibitive favorites. I would imagine that those are the guys that are going to show up and want to play. Maybe from the Rockets, too. They feel like they have an outside shot. I bet the teams that have like the least amount of chance to get there, those are going to be the players that are like, do I really want to go hang out in a bubble down in Orlando? What's it really going to cost me? Yeah, I'll beg out. That's what I think is going to happen when it comes down to it. And, for Pop, I mean, I get it. Is it ageism? If you are keeping them away because of their age, but you're protecting them. This is a public health situation. So you can't just allow a coach that has an underlying condition, and if he comes up with a positive test or you find out through a medical check that he has something like asthma or something, it's for their own good. Will this cost them jobs in the future? Yeah. Look at coronavirus is costing a lot of people jobs right out in front or through different situations. So, I mean, it's happening to a lot of people. It sucks, man. But we understand that this is part of it. I mean, I get what Pop is saying here, but Also, it's what's happening right now.
Yeah, and I'll put up one additional quote from that article from Nesson for you, and I highlighted it. And it says Popovich, 71, and other older coaches are among those considered higher risk for COVID-19 once the NBA resumes play. But the doctor's decision will be final, binding, and unspeakable per the league. So that says to me that there's not going to be any sort of appeals process or anything like that. Where, hey, I think I'm good to go. I know I'm old, but my blood pressure's not that high, or I know I don't have diabetes. I should be good to go. Look, that could really cause a problem come the playoffs if you've got. I mean, forget some of the older coaches.
Playoffs.
Like, let's look at Vogel, the head coach of the Lakers. If he seems like he's relatively healthy, but the doctors find whatever they might find that shows that he's at higher risk, what if the Lakers have to go into the playoffs without their head coach? Or what if the Bucks have to? Or what if the Raptors don't have Nick Nurse? He led them to a championship last year. All those things are concerning, and these things don't look good when it comes to this Orlando bubble. I like you think that the vast majority of these players are going to show up. They love the game of basketball. They haven't played in a long time. Certainly, if you're a top 4 seed or higher, you're going to show up. If you're one of those teams like the Portland Trail Blazers that are still on the outside looking in, then you might say, well, what's the point of going into a bubble for only 8 regular season games, and then I might not make the playoffs, and if I do, I'm highly likely to get swept in the first round. I could get that, but I think that most of these players are going to show up. One big issue, though, is the great unknown, because the NBA, today's June 18th, the NBA is slated to start on July 30th, which is 43 days from now. What's the world, what's America, what's Florida going to look like in terms of the pandemic 43 days from now? 43 days ago, Michigan was one of the coronavirus hotspots. Today, Florida is. Is Florida going to be an even hotter spot in 43 days? Or are they going to look more like Michigan? We don't know. And obviously, the NBA is going to have to be ready to adjust accordingly. And if the governor doesn't do things like mandate masks or reshut things down or take some other steps to try to curb the coronavirus pandemic, the NBA might decide, you know what? Perhaps we'll have to go somewhere else for a bubble, because the Disney bubble is not a safe place at all. It's a petri dish.
Well, one thing I'm pretty sure of is Patrick Beverley is going to be using that anonymous snitch line to be calling in on some of the Lakers. Maybe I saw LeBron James within 6 feet of somebody. You better test him. I know that he's going to do that. I could also see the Rockets being down 0-3. I would bet that there's not going to be too many guys showing up and interested in having a long series if they get down 3-0. Staying a couple days there in the hotels. They're ready to get out and get their freedom. All right, let's move it.
Well, I also wanted to bring up this about the state of Michigan, because we've actually seen our cases plummeting in the state. This is actually a graphic that has gone viral, and it's from John Hopkins and CNN, pointing out the states where you've seen the biggest rises and the biggest drops in coronavirus cases from last week compared to this week. And as you can see, there are 18 states where there's been a rise in the last week. 8 of those states have seen a rise of at least 50%, and Florida is one of those states. A lot of them, they say, are from the Miami-Dade area, but some of them are also in the Orlando area, which is where the bubble is going to be. That seems like it's perhaps one of the most dangerous spots in the country to have a bubble. Meanwhile, in the state of Michigan, where we had one of the strictest lockdowns in the country, Michigan, this is as of Tuesday, was the only state that has seen at least a 50% drop in coronavirus cases over the last week. Additionally, I saw this article on the Detroit News website, and it pointed out that, I believe it was on Wednesday, there were only 2 coronavirus deaths reported. Yeah, there you go. 2 coronavirus deaths reported in the state of Michigan. And we're seeing 145 new cases a day over the last week compared to 178 the week before. I mean, maybe they should move the bubble to Michigan because our numbers have dropped so significantly.
Yeah, well, hopefully it is because of the preventative measures that we took, and other than states will take a look, and if we see more of this kind of trend, maybe, their governors, despite whatever political affiliation they have, will follow our lead. But that's not very likely. There's not many people, like you find just as many people that will still say negative things about Michigan in terms of percentage of deaths and hospitalization. So it looks good, that chart. I mean, I hope that it looks like a good trend. I'm keeping my fingers crossed and all that, but I still think it's too early on any of this. Like you mentioned, 43 days away from Orlando, we could be sitting here in 3 weeks and talking about, well, Florida, man, they've really made a great case of improvement. That's just how this thing's going, moving around the country. I thought, though, the one thing that I thought is that it made sense to me, at least, I don't know much about this particular virus or viruses at all, but it made a little bit of sense that when Michigan was getting hit in New York, that not it wasn't winter, but it wasn't, actually hot in the summer. And, the word was that the virus didn't perform very well in the warmer states. So I thought Arizona and Florida, which are hot as blazes, that, you would actually have better numbers for them in the summer, but that's not been the case.
Well, and from what I've heard from the experts, whether you believe them or not on TV, is that the big reason is because while the coronavirus does not take well to UV rays, which are stronger in those parts of the country than up here, the big reason that you're seeing a drop in our area and not so down there is because they don't require masks to be worn in public in those places. And in Michigan, you do have to wear a mask everywhere that you go. In some of these other northern states, in New York, they demand, in Ohio, I think they demand that you wear one everywhere that you go, and you're seeing the numbers drop. So if they're going to say, act like it's normal, don't wear a mask, then it's going to be easier for it to spread.
JG says Chris Paul's hotel room is going to be located right at the bubble perimeter, ready to tell on dudes breaking quarantine. So there you go.
I could see that.
Well, there's all kinds of chances for video behind the scenes, whether it's ping pong games or golf games or, guys getting pedicures, whatever it's going to be. If they're going to be locked down with each other for, weeks on end, got to be some pretty good stories coming out of there.
Yeah, we'll find out about them. Let's turn the page now to the fourth chapter.
Yeah, good news for the Pistons today. They finally find a GM, and they hire Oklahoma City's executive. He was VP of Ops there for OKC. His name is Troy Weaver. He is the 9th current black GM in the NBA. Come on down, Mr. Weaver. You're the general manager of the Detroit Pistons. What do you think?
Well, I like the hire of Weaver. I like taking a guy from a successful organization. That doesn't always work out, as we know, in Detroit, because just look at Bob Quinn of the same old Lions coming over from the New England Patriots. The Lions are still the same old Lions, but Weaver was there for 12 years. He apparently was pursued by the Detroit Pistons 2 years ago, but the Thunder would not allow the Pistons to interview him. He gets a lot of credit for drafting Russell Westbrook. I like that. He was there when they drafted Harden and Steven Adams and Serge Ibaka. But what impresses me the most about Weaver is that Oklahoma City has lost a lot of talent in the last few years, and they haven't lost a whole lot of games. They haven't become a bottom feeder despite that. There was a time when they had Harden, Westbrook, and Kevin Durant. There was a time after they lost Harden that they still had Westbrook and Durant, and they went to the NBA Finals. When they lost Harden, they didn't drop off. When they lost Durant, they dropped off, but they were still making the playoffs. They made the playoffs each of the last 3 years as a top 6 seed. And then this year, without Russell Westbrook and without Paul George, everyone thought they'd miss the playoffs, even though they brought in Chris Paul. A lot of folks thought he'd be a cancer, and he won out immediately. Instead, he was part of the group that executed the trade to get Paul George out and bring Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Danilo Gallinari in. Those are their top 2 scorers. In that trade, the Thunder also got 5 first-round picks and 2 first-round pick swaps. They signed Dennis Schroeder before the previous season. He was in Atlanta, and he's their 3rd leading scorer. And as we sit here right now waiting for the NBA to resume, they're tied for the 5th seed in the NBA's Western Conference. They have a 40-24 record. The fact that they could lose all that top-tier talent and still be not just respectable, but a respectable playoff team, I think is incredible. So I like the hire. He's not perfect, and I'll get to some of what I don't like in just a second, but I like the hire overall.
It's the Thunder way for the Pistons. You know what I hope is that when you're giving a guy the title as GM, that he gets final say. Like when the Pistons come up, let's just say they stay where they're at, and they end up with the 5th overall pick, that it's going to be Troy Weaver who's making the selection. It's not, they didn't make that clear. They will make that clear at the news conference whenever they have it. I would assume coming up this week, that would be the first thing. Like, you bringing in a general manager, or is he going to get final say on what's happening here, or is it going to be Ed Stefanski, or what you're doing there? They got to clear that up because that was not made clear today. The one other thing I like about him, look, and I like Chauncey Billups and I liked Mark Hughes, although admittedly both of those guys, I loved how Chauncey Billups commanded a room just being around him. I love that guy. And of course, as a player, the same thing with Mark Hughes, a guy from Michigan, from Muskegon, a guy who was the co-captain of the Wolverines national title team in '89. He's gone on. He's with the Clippers. So, familiarity there as well. So I like both of those guys, but I give this guy a chance. And I like somebody that went from, this is an unusual pipeline, starting out in the AAU circuit, then going to Syracuse as an assistant. And I saw, Perk today on the jump, credited him with being the final guy who was able to land Carmelo Anthony to get him to Syracuse. Then he made his way to the NBA as a scout, an executive, and now he ends up as a GM. That's an unusual pipeline.
No, you're right. And you mentioned that Kendrick Perkins was on the jump earlier today talking about the decision to hire Troy Weaver. He and Brian Windhurst liked the hire. Here is what they had to say about the Pistons hiring Troy Weaver.
Weaver had been the vice president of basketball operations with Oklahoma City. Perk, this was your pick for the job when we discussed it a few weeks back. Explain to the people why Troy Weaver is such a good leader.
Rachel, I have been campaigning for Troy Weaver for the longest. Troy Weaver has one of the best eye for talents in the NBA. When you look at Troy Weaver, not only did he take a chance in drafting Russell Westbrook in the lottery, but go back to his college days when he worked for Syracuse. He was the one that got Carmelo Anthony to Syracuse. Troy Weaver has a great eye for talent, and I'm so happy and so proud. This time is way overdue for him, and Detroit has struck gold with this one.
Yeah, the Pistons tried to hire him 2 years ago, but the Thunder denied permission. We're going to have to find out. This guy's one of the most respected guys in the league, no doubt. We're going to have to find out where he ranks in the hierarchy, though, because there's a little bit of no clarity on who's got final say. We'll see, because Troy Weaver is a guy who deserves to run the organization.
Absolutely.
And as we transition back to see that offensive mug, by the way, I got a friend of mine who said that one of his favorite things about the show are when we talk about the non-sports issues, like about the coronavirus pandemic, and when he sees that mug of yours. And, of course, he's got 2 degrees from Michigan. But, look, when you see Perkins talk about Troy Weaver, one thing you have to mention is that he might be biased because he played for Oklahoma City for a year or 2 at the end of his career, so he knows him. But he also might know all the positive things about him, and Brian Windhurst said some great things about him as well. I think that it's certainly better than having them come out there and rip a guy and having everyone say, where did this guy come from? I like the decision, and I like that the Pistons, now that I think about it, maybe it was the right decision to wait 2 years to hire an official GM, because now a GM feels like they've got something to work with. The Pistons are going to have the 3rd most cap space. They'll have a decision to make on a promising young player in Christian Wood, a guy who I think is going to get $15+ million a year. You don't think he's going to get 10.
No.
They need a point guard for the future, but in terms of contracts that they've got left, over $1.7 million for next year, Demboya, Kennard, Rose, Snell, and Griffin, and that's it. They've got lots of flexibility, plus the chance to draft LaMelo Ball.
Yeah, or Killian Hayes, the lefty from France, or the kid from Iowa State, or Edwards from Georgia. And there's a lot of guys there. If we had to guess right now, if I had to guess, I would think it would be a point guard. They're in dire need of one. But I think the one thing about this team, and Weaver gets a 4-year deal, but I don't think the Pistons are going to be relevant for 4 years. I think over the next 3 years, they're going to be closer to getting the 5th pick and going to be in the lottery despite all the money they have. And I think that's where they should be. I think that they should look to move Blake if they can, like they did Drummond, just move him for some cap space. And then I would say whenever they can be in the double draft, which would be 2021, where players can come right out of high school, like Amani Bates, and be in that double draft, and then look to really strike after that. So I think the next 2 years, it's big on whoever we'll see who Weaver ends up selecting with that first pick, but he's going to have another high pick next year and probably the following year.
Yeah, and drafting is going to be critical because the Pistons right now have just 2 first-round draft picks on their roster, Kennard and Doumbouya. Kennard was looking better until he got hurt. Doumbouya had the dunk on Tristan Thompson Kardashian, and then not a whole lot of highlights after that. But here's the one thing that makes me a little concerned about Troy Weaver. Obviously, he wasn't the head. He wasn't the GM. He was the director the vice president of basketball operations. But the Thunder have not drafted well lately. Now, they didn't have any first-round draft picks or any draft picks last year. They didn't have any first-round picks in 2018. But let's look at their last 4 first-round draft picks. With the 21st pick in 2017, Oklahoma City took Terrence Ferguson. He's only 21, but in his 3rd year in the NBA, he's averaging 23 minutes a game and 4 points a game. Not impressed.
Got hurt last year against the Pistons, yep.
No first-round pick in 2016. In 2015, they drafted Cameron Payne. He's a bust. He's in the G League. He hasn't played in the NBA since last season. In 2014, Oklahoma City drafted your boy, Mitch McGary from Michigan, and Josh Huestis. Both of them are busts. McGary lasted 2 seasons and played 52 games. Huestis lasted 3 seasons and played 76 games. Look, a top 5 pick is not something that they've had in Oklahoma City in a long time, so this should be easier, but you build your team not just with first-round picks, and his draft picks, the Oklahoma City draft picks in the first round over the last 6-7 years have been pretty bad.
Well, I don't know if you saw the report from Woj, who said that the Weaver was completely against getting McGary and Ferguson. I thought that really spoke highly.
Oh, I didn't see that.
No, I just made that up.
Oh.
But that would
Fake news.
That would have been a nice Woj bomb.
Very dishonest member of the media right there.
That's right. Well, you know what? I think that's a pretty good question for him, considering, he's getting all the plaudits like, oh, man, you were all over Westbrook and you were banging the table, to get Russell Westbrook out of UCLA at 4 when a lot of other people had him going to the Knicks at like 7 or 8. And, oh, yeah, you liked Harden when he was coming out of Arizona State, and Serge Ibaka, nice pull there as you were in on him. What about McGary and what about Ferguson? What did you think of those guys and some of those other picks?
Yeah, if they're lottery picks, it's a little bit easier. If they're not, then he's going to drop the bust. I also want to know, and we're not going to know probably until the end of next year, but what he thinks about Dwayne Casey, because I know a lot of folks around here are saying, oh, yeah, Dwayne Casey's, I'm all in on him and things like that. And certainly he's not going to fire Dwayne Casey with 3 years left in the job. He knows that. But you could fire a coach with 2 years left in the job. I wonder what he thinks, because I continue to look at Casey and I say, where is this proof in Detroit that he's a great coach? Because he comes to Detroit, and in his first year in Detroit, in his first year in Detroit, he sees his former team Toronto win a championship without him, and then they lose Kawhi Leonard. They still have the 3rd best record in the NBA. He had a healthy Blake Griffin for 90% of his first season in Detroit, and an improving Andre Drummond, and coached them up to a 500 record and 4 humongous blowout losses to the Bucks. If he's a great coach, you think he could coach him up into some close games like we saw Stan Van Gundy do when he took them to the playoffs and they had 3 close games against the Cavs. And then this year, they got the 5th worst record in the NBA. If Casey's such a good coach, How do they have the 5th worst record in the NBA, and how do they have a team that's lost 12 out of 13 games? Casey has some explaining to do, and perhaps he should enter next season on the hot seat.
Now, their personnel blows. I don't care if it was Chuck Daly or Larry Brown over there on the bench.
It's not good.
This team is set up to be a bottom 5 team right now, and it's going to be that way next year. Like, the big thing that, this is all good that they're bringing in a guy, and, it's going to be the Thunder way, and, finally they've got a front office and everything else, and they're clearing cap space, and they're going to have a top 5 pick. But I want, Weaver doesn't have to come out and say that they're tanking over the next 2 years and looking towards the double draft, and by his 3rd or 4th year, that's when they hope to jump in there and compete. But we're going to know by his signings. Pistons better not go out there looking to sign some pricey veterans and, trying to be a middling team. They've gone down here. They got to take their medicine for a couple of years. And Dwayne Casey is a good coach to have at the sideline when your team blows.
We'll see about that. I hope so. I'm just waiting for the proof that he can coach them up. Getting clowned by the Bucks.
But he's like
12 out of 13.
He's like Blashill. The Red Wings aren't going anywhere. The Pistons aren't going anywhere. When they are ready to go somewhere, if you think those guys aren't the guys then, well, then you find their replacements.
All right, Dennis, let's turn the page now to the 5th chapter. And, of course, you are back from Florida. I thought you were going to have a Civil War memorial story, but you decided not to go. So, obviously, I've got another ride-sharing story, but we'll start off first with the man, the Fifth, the legend, Dennis Fithian, when we do story time.
It didn't happen. We didn't end up in Chattanooga. All the Airbnbs were taken up, so we stayed in North Georgia. There was no great stories there. The Airbnb was right in the parking lot. There was a train that kept going by pretty loud at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Maybe you get used to that if you've ever lived by a train. But that wasn't my story. I have to go back to 1998. They had the McGuire-Sosa documentary on ESPN this last Sunday. I didn't watch it, but I've always contended, that those guys didn't save baseball, that baseball would have been just fine. But it was an interesting year. But those guys, clouting home runs like they did, and I was thinking, what really did save baseball for me? Because after 94, I went and started watching college baseball, Big Ten baseball, 95, 96, 97. Man, I was down at Ray Fisher Stadium watching the Wolverines play baseball. And no, it wasn't Major League Baseball, but I still liked it. And I was like, you know what? I can just watch college baseball for the rest of my life. But in 98, and knowing that Tiger Stadium was not only long in the tooth, but they were ready to blow that thing up, I would go to some Tiger games here and there, but I thought I never wanted to really go up to the press box. But in 98, with the Cardinals coming in and McGuire would go on to hit 70 home runs, I had seen Sosa when I went to Chicago for the Big Ten coaches meetings. I went to a game, and he hit a home run. So then I went to that Cardinals series, and I went up into the press box, and outdoors, right when you go to the old Tiger Stadium press box, you could be outdoors there. It was kind of like a suite, but they let it go, and the benches were broken and everything. But imagine sitting up there and watching McGuire take BP. It was the most one of the biggest highlights in sports. One of the coolest things, watching this guy hit home runs over the left field roof, watching him just blow them into the upper deck bleachers. Just an amazing display of power. Now, he was juiced up and he was a monster, but I didn't know all that. Just watching somebody hit the ball that far in batting practice, one of the most impressive feats, steroids or not, that I ever saw, was witness to in that upper deck right outside the press box in 1998, watching Mark McGuire. That's my story.
Yeah, that's one of the things that you miss as a fan, is being able to go to a baseball game early and see batting practice. I mean, you've got some of the biggest sluggers of all time at the games, getting there at 5, getting there at 5:30, getting your hot dog. If you drink beer, you get your beer early, and you watch the BP, and then you go hang out for a little bit, and then the game starts. But, of course...
Yeah, but I missed Christian Stewart doing that this year, knocking all those homers out in BP.
Yeah, how many fans do you think showed up early last year to see Christian Stewart play bat or take batting practice?
There's always about 100 that are down there looking to get autographs and stuff, but not many looking for Christian Stewart. I don't know if the Tigers. I think McGuire hit more home runs in that BP than the whole Tiger team hit last year during the regular season.
Yeah, you might be right about that. Well, as a lot of you guys know, I drive for Uber and Lyft, and a lot of times when I'm driving, people talk to me about their relationships. Oftentimes they're going to see a significant other, or they just came from seeing a significant other. And even though I'm not in a relationship, I end up giving them advice, and they're almost always appreciative. And maybe I should start some sort of like relationship coaching business on the side. But it seems like it's really easy to give advice sometimes because there a lot of folks out there don't have common sense, and some of these relationships just seem doomed. And you get to see how poorly people treat each other. And a prime example happened about a month or two ago. So remember, this would be when we're at the peak of the quarantine in Michigan. And this woman requested a ride from a motel at about 1 a.m. And when I got there, it was a man who got into my car because the woman had requested the ride for him. They were staying in the motel overnight, and you can probably guess what they were planning to do. Now, the man was supposed to be going out to a 24-hour drugstore so that he could pick up some snacks for the two of them. And they had been waiting a long time for a ride, and they had thought about walking. And that made sense because ever since the pandemic started, the wait time for rides has been extremely long, especially at night. Every night, at least one person tells me they had to wait at least an hour for a ride. Oftentimes people wait for 2 hours or more just to get a ride because a lot of drivers are choosing not to drive right now. But this drugstore was a little over a mile away. And while we're on the way to this drugstore, he's complaining and he's saying, I can't believe she's got me going out to get these snacks. We should have just walked, and she needs the exercise. I'm laughing. But we get there, and the drugstore is closed. So he calls her up and tells her it's closed, and we start heading to a 7-Eleven because he told me that might be open. But yeah, exactly, your favorite. But while we're driving over there, and he's on the phone, and he's telling her it wasn't open, and they're arguing, and she says it had to have been open, and she lives in that area, so she knows it's open. And he says, do you think that me and this driver are lying? So he hangs up the phone, and then we get to the 7-Eleven, and the 7-Eleven is not open because a lot of the 7-Elevens are closing at 11. And he's complaining and saying, she's got me doing all this and trying to get snacks, and with her fat ass, she don't need no snacks. I'm thinking, wow, this relationship doesn't seem like it's going all that well. And I said, maybe things aren't the greatest with you and your girlfriend. He's like, oh no, it's not my girlfriend, but she's always driving me crazy. And so while we're going back, I decided to pull over and see if there's another drugstore, and there is a drugstore, the same name drugstore, but it was 5 miles away on the same street, but 5 miles away. So we go over there, and it turns out that was the drugstore that she was talking about, but she didn't know. So we go over there, and he goes inside. He's only going to be there for a minute or two. And so while he's inside, she starts messaging me and says, hey, did you get there? I said, yes. And she said, okay, you can just drop him off. You don't have to wait for him to come out. And I'm thinking, what? just leave the dude there? And I didn't respond because he was only going to be there for a minute or two. There's no other cars, no other people were inside. And he might have had to wait 2 more hours to get another ride because of how nobody was driving at that time. So he gets back in the car a couple of minutes later, and as we're driving back, I tell him what she told me. I said, hey, your girl said that I could leave you there. He's like, what? And I pulled over. I think we were at a stoplight, and I showed him the message on the phone. It's like, yeah, you can just leave him there. I was like, hey, you might want to drop this girl because she said to just leave you stranded all by yourself at this drugstore. And then as we're on our way back, I'm getting more messages from her saying, hey, are you on your way back? Hey, did you drop him off? Meanwhile, if you know anything about these apps, you can see that you can track the driver on your way. So she knows that we're on our way back, and she's messaging me frantically, hey, are you bringing him back? You can just leave him there. What's going on? And then I'm saying to the guy in the back seat, she might have another guy over there right now. And that might be why she doesn't want you there. But we get to the motel. I dropped him off, and I said, good luck with your girl. You should probably break up with her. But that was it. I didn't check to see if there was another man there. But when I see situations like that, how disrespectful people can be to other people, and they can still be in a relationship. And I think to myself, I've never done anything close to anything like that in terms of disrespecting a woman. And women barely give me the time of day, even after a good first date. And it's like, you know what? Just forget it. Or maybe I should start treating women like trash, because that's the key.
Well, that's not. You'll find yours. You don't want one like that. Stay out of other people's relationships. No, that would be my advice.
Hey, but
all right.
That guy was appreciative that I told him what was going on, and just about everybody. As a matter of fact, I haven't heard one person tell me they didn't appreciate the advice that I gave them, because a lot of folks, they don't have common sense. But he needed to know that woman wanted me to just drop him off and leave him.
All right, well, coming up on Tuesday show, we appreciate everybody watching. Colin Kaepernick, Anthony Lynn's like, oh, yeah, other teams. Rappaport saying that there's a lot of interest in signing Cap. Maybe it'll be Derek's Dolphins that'll end up getting him. We'll see. We'll talk about if there's all this interest, who's going to step to the plate and actually sign Kaepernick. That's coming up on Tuesday's Fifth Chapter.
And don't forget to leave your feedback next Tuesday and Thursday so that you can win a big gift card.
What he said. Do it.
He represents the mitten by way of Penn State. When Chapman gets to talking sports, the people can't wait. He represents the mitten. Be a true EMU, but cut Dennis in the fall, and his veins bleeding blue. They got respect around the state. When that light turns red, so don't sleep on these dudes. Just invite your friends to cut your nap short and tip your cap for and sit back for the Fifth Chapter. Brian Chapman, Dennis Fithian. When they open their mouths, they spit in the facts, bruh. This ain't even optional, man. You just have to tune into YouTube to watch the broadcast, or download it to your phone to peep the podcast. They mix laughter, they get after. It's all captured in the Fifth Chapter.
All right, we're done.